The moving truck pulled away from my driveway at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was staring at the grandfather clock in what used to be my living room, the one my late husband George bought me for our 25th anniversary. The clock was the only thing left standing in the house. I'd called home for 43 years. My daughter-in-law Jessica had given my son Michael an ultimatum 3 days prior. Either your mother goes, or I do. He chose her. The house that George and I had scraped together every penny to buy, where we'd raised Michael through scraped knees and algebra homework, where we'd hosted every Christmas and birthday for nearly half a century. Suddenly, it wasn't mine anymore. The deed, you see, had been quietly transferred to Michael's name 2 years ago when I'd been diagnosed with what the doctors initially thought was early-stage dementia. A precaution, he'd said. For my own protection, he'd said. Don't forget to hit that notification bell if you want to hear more stories like this one. Trust me, this is just the beginning. The woman I used to be. My name is Eleanor Marie Hartwell, and I wasn't always the woman sitting in a sparse studio apartment, recording this story on my grandson's old laptop. I was once a force of nature, a high school English teacher who could silence a room of teenagers with a single look, a mother who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table. After George's first heart attack, a woman who built a life from nothing but determination and love. I raised Michael alone after George died, when the boy was only 16. Those were the leanest years, when I'd eat crackers for dinner so Michael could have proper meals, when I'd mend his clothes by candlelight to save on the electric bill. I watched him grow from a sensitive, grateful child into a successful accountant with his own firm. I was proud. God, I was so proud. When Michael married Jessica 5 years ago, I tried to love her like my own daughter. She was 28 to his 42, blonde and brittle, in the way that some young women are when they've learned early that their looks can get them things. She'd never worked a day in her life, having gone from her father's house to various boyfriends' apartments to my son's bank account. But Michael was happy, and that was enough for me. Or so I told myself. The slow erosion. The changes started small. Jessica would rearrange my furniture when she visited, claiming she was helping make the house more modern. She'd throw away my belongings, old photographs, my grandmother's china, books I'd collected over decades. Under the guise of decluttering, "Oh, Eleanor," she'd say with that saccharine smile, "you don't need all this old stuff. It's just making the house feel so heavy, heavy." My entire life's collection of memories was too heavy for her delicate sensibilities. Michael began visiting less frequently. Phone calls became shorter. When I'd mention feeling lonely, he'd suggest I look into senior communities where I could make friends my own age. As if friendship was something you could purchase by the hour at an activity center. The manipulation was so gradual, so expertly done, that I almost didn't notice it happening. Jessica had a talent for making her cruelest suggestions sound like loving concern. "We're just worried about you living alone, Eleanor. What if you fell? What if you forgot to turn off the stove?" I hadn't forgotten to turn off anything in my life, but suddenly everyone was treating me like I was one step away from burning down the neighborhood. The diagnosis that changed everything. The memory issues started after George's death. Grief, the doctor said, could manifest in many ways. Sometimes I'd forget where I'd put my keys, or I'd walk into a room and forget why I'd come there. Normal things. Things that happen to everyone, but Jessica seized on them like a hawk spotting prey. "See?" she'd whisper to Michael, loud enough for me to hear. "She's getting worse." The doctor visits became more frequent. Tests, evaluations, concerned looks exchanged over my head, as if I'd already disappeared. The preliminary diagnosis was mild cognitive impairment, not dementia, not Alzheimer's, just the normal aging process, accelerated by grief and stress. But Jessica heard what she wanted to hear. Suddenly, I was unsafe, living alone. I needed supervision. I needed to sign papers for my own protection. The house transfer happened on a Thursday. Michael brought the documents to my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework for 12 years. "It's just paperwork, Mom," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Nothing's really changing. But this way, if something happens to you, there won't be any legal complications." I signed. God help me. I signed because I trusted my son, and because the alternative, Admitting that the child I'd raised might be capable of betraying me was too painful to consider. The ultimatum. For 2 years, I lived in my house that was no longer legally mine. Jessica's visits became more frequent, her demands more brazen. She wanted to redecorate. She wanted to host parties. She wanted to convert my sewing room into a home office for her wellness consulting business, a venture that consisted primarily of posting motivational quotes on Instagram. The final straw came when she announced she was pregnant. "We're going to need more space," she told me over dinner at my own dining room table. "This house is perfect for raising a family. Real families need real space." The implication was clear. I was not real family. That's when she gave Michael the ultimatum. Choose between his wife and his unborn child, or his aging mother. Choose between his future and his past. He chose, and it wasn't me, the exile. If this story is resonating with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes we don't realize we're not alone until someone else shares their truth. The studio apartment Jessica found for me was in a complex called Golden Years Manor, a name that managed to be both condescending and depressing. It came furnished with the kind of furniture you'd expect: beige everything, motivational posters about living your best life, and a view of the parking lot. Michael helped me move. He carried my boxes with the careful efficiency of someone trying to complete an unpleasant task as quickly as possible. He wouldn't look at me directly, and when he spoke, it was in the tone you'd use with a child who was being relocated for their own good. "You'll like it here, Mom," he said, surveying the cramped space. "It's safe. There's a community room. Activities, activities," as if my life had been reduced to arts and crafts and bingo. After he left, I sat on the institutional couch in my beige living room and felt something I hadn't experienced since George's death. Complete, profound aloneness. But this time, it wasn't death that had taken my family from me. It was choice. The awakening, the first month, was the hardest. I existed in a fog of grief and disbelief, going through the motions of living while feeling like I was already dead. The other residents at Golden Years Manor tried to include me in their activities, but I couldn't find the energy to pretend I was grateful for this new chapter of my life. Then came the day that changed everything. I was sorting through the few possessions I'd been allowed to keep when I found George's old briefcase, stuffed with papers I'd never bothered to examine. Insurance documents, old tax returns, warranties for appliances we'd long since replaced. But at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was something I'd forgotten existed: the original deed to our house. Not just any deed, the original mortgage documents, showing that the house had been paid off entirely with George's life insurance money. Documentation of every renovation, every improvement, every cent we'd invested in making that house a home. Most importantly, a letter George had written to me shortly before his death, witnessed and notarized, stating his intentions for the property. I sat on my beige couch, reading my husband's words, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. My son had not just taken my home, he had stolen it. The Education of Eleanor Hartwell. Don't forget to comment below if you've ever felt like you were being pushed aside by your own family. Your stories matter, and they give me strength to continue sharing mine. I hadn't been inside a law library since my college days, but desperation is a powerful motivator. I spent 3 weeks researching elder law, property rights, and the legal requirements for transferring real estate. I learned about concepts like undue influence and financial abuse of the elderly. I discovered that there were laws specifically designed to protect people like me from situations exactly like mine. The more I learned, the angrier I became. And the angrier I became, the clearer my thinking grew. It was as if the fog of grief and confusion that had clouded my mind for the past 2 years was finally lifting, burned away by the heat of my fury. I wasn't suffering from dementia or cognitive decline. I was suffering from heartbreak, and I'd been so devastated by the loss of my husband that I'd allowed myself to be convinced I was losing my mind as well. But my mind was fine, sharp, even, and I was going to use it. Building the case. The first attorney I consulted was a kind young woman named Sarah Chen, who specialized in elder law. She listened to my story with the appropriate amount of outrage, but her professional assessment was sobering. "Do you have any evidence that the transfer was made under duress, or that you weren't competent to make the decision?" she asked. I thought about it. The medical records showing my grief-related memory issues, the timing of the transfer so soon after the preliminary diagnosis, the fact that I'd received no independent legal counsel, no explanation of what I was actually signing. I might, I said. Mrs. Hartwell, Sarah said gently, even if we can prove undue influence, your son and daughter-in-law are living in the house now, they're expecting a child. Any legal action will be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally devastating for everyone involved. More devastating than what they've already done to me? I asked. She couldn't answer that. The investigation, I hired a private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Frank Martinez, who specialized in financial crimes. What he discovered over the next 6 weeks was more damning than I dared hope. Jessica had been planning this for years. She'd researched my financial situation, my health, my relationship with Michael. She'd been the one to suggest that Michael take control of my finances for my own protection. She'd been the one to insist on the medical evaluations that led to my diagnosis. She'd even been the one to find the apartment at Golden Years Manor, 6 months before she gave Michael the ultimatum. But the most damning discovery was the real estate appraisal she'd secretly commissioned. My house, which I'd been told was worth maybe $200,000, was actually valued at $850,000. The neighborhood had gentrified significantly in recent years, and the property was now worth nearly $1 million. My daughter-in-law hadn't just wanted me out of the way, she'd wanted to steal my fortune. The confrontation. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. I promise you this is where things get really interesting. I didn't call ahead. I didn't make an appointment. I drove to my former home, my stolen home, on a Saturday morning when I knew they'd both be there. Jessica answered the door, her pregnancy now showing under a designer dress I couldn't have afforded when I was working 2 jobs. Her face went through a series of expressions when she saw me: surprise, annoyance, and finally, the calculated sweetness she'd perfected over the years. Eleanor. What a surprise. Michael's just in the shower, but come in. Come in. I stepped into my living room and saw what she'd done to it. The walls were painted a trendy gray, my furniture replaced with modern pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The grandfather clock was gone. In its place stood a massive flat-screen television. I need to speak with both of you, I said. Of course, dear. Can I get you some tea? Coffee? No, just get Michael. Something in my tone must have warned her, because her smile faltered. Is everything all right? You seem upset. I'm fine, I said. Better than I've been in years, actually. The reckoning Michael came downstairs still buttoning his shirt, and the look on his face when he saw me was everything I needed to know about his guilt. He'd been avoiding me for months, and now here I was standing in what used to be our living room, with an expression he probably remembered from his teenage years, when he'd been caught in a lie. Mom, he said, what are you doing here? I want to talk to both of you about this house, I said. Specifically, about how it came to be transferred into your name. Jessica moved closer to Michael, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. Eleanor, we've been through this. The house was transferred for your own protection. You weren't well. Stop, I said. The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften it. I'm not finished talking, and you're not going to interrupt me again. The silence that followed was profound. I could see both of them registering the change in me, the return of the woman who'd once commanded classrooms full of unruly teenagers. I've spent the last 3 months educating myself about elder law, I continued. I've hired an attorney and a private investigator. I know about the real estate appraisal, Jessica. I know about your research into my finances. I know about the apartment you selected for me 6 months before you gave Michael your ultimatum. Jessica's face went white. Michael looked confused, then horrified as the implications sank in. What appraisal? He asked. The one your wife commissioned to determine the actual value of this house, I said. $850,000, Michael. That's what our home is worth. That's what she convinced you to steal from me. I didn't steal anything, Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. You took advantage of a grieving widow, I said. You used my temporary memory issues to convince me to sign away my life's work. You chose your wife's greed over your mother's well-being. That's not, Jessica started. I told you to stop talking, I said, and she did. I turned back to my son. Do you remember the day you came home from school crying because Tommy Henderson had stolen your lunch money? You were 8 years old, and you asked me why some people thought it was okay to take things that didn't belong to them. Michael's face crumpled. He remembered. I told you that sometimes people steal because they're desperate, and sometimes they steal because they're greedy. But that neither reason made it right. I told you that a person's character is measured by how they treat people who can't fight back. Mom, please. What kind of character does it show? I continued to steal from a grieving widow. What kind of character does it show? To abandon the woman who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you, who loved you more than her own life. The tears were streaming down Michael's face now, but I wasn't finished. And what kind of character does it show? I said, looking directly at Jessica. To orchestrate the financial abuse of an elderly woman. To manipulate her son into betraying everything he was raised to believe in. The ultimatum. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you want to see how this story ends. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady and calm. You have 30 days to transfer the deed back to my name. You have 30 days to compensate me for the rent I should have been charging you for the past 2 years. And you have 30 days to return every item you removed from this house without my permission. And if we don't, Jessica asked, her voice shaking, then I file a lawsuit for elder abuse, financial fraud, and undue influence. I take you to court, where all of this becomes public record. I make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of people you are. You can't prove anything, Jessica said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I have documentation of your research into my finances, I said. I have evidence of the secret appraisal. I have medical records showing that my cognitive issues were temporary and grief-related. I have witnesses who can testify to your manipulation. And I have a very good lawyer who's taken this case on contingency, because she believes what you did was unconscionable. Michael was sobbing now, his face in his hands. Mom, please. The baby is innocent in all of this, I said. But the baby doesn't change what you've done. The baby doesn't make your theft acceptable. I looked around the room one more time, at the home that had been stolen from me, at the son who had chosen greed over love, at the daughter-in-law who had orchestrated it all. 30 days, I said. The waiting game. The next month was the longest of my life.
I don't know.